Hello and welcome to my knife channel. Well, this video is going to be a little bit different in that I'm going to go over knife bias. Now, I've got all these different knives out here and I'll use them as examples, but I'm not really doing a review of these individual knives and stuff like that. What bias is described as in the dictionary is prejudiced in favor or against something, usually in a way considered to be unfair. So the main point behind this one, and I got a few little notes here that I can go over because I've been thinking about this. With knife channels, the reason why I started this knife channel is to share my joy and love of knives and stuff. And the problem with that is if you're really into knives and stuff and you don't have anybody around you that's really into knives, you wind up talking to yourself in your head a lot of times. And that's what happened with this. I was thinking about how some of my knife biases and prejudice and stuff caused me to miss out on a huge portion of knife collecting and enjoyment that I could have taken advantage of a lot more if I wouldn't have had a bias against it. And what I'm specifically talking about is traditional pattern knives. When I grew up, we really didn't have any super steels and knives. You had carbon steel and stainless steel, which could be like surgical stainless or whatever. It seemed to be usually somewhat stainless. Maybe it was better than carbon steel, resisting stainless, resisting rust. But it tended to be kind of a soft metal. Didn't hold an edge very well or take one, at least in my experience, from back then. And then when I had a transitional period where all we could get was, like a buck 110 folding hunter was like the height that you could get, as far as like the best knife for all around, general carry and stuff like that. At least it was for me. And that's what I went to and I carried for a long time, but they're heavy. I mean, they're heavier than this big trapper right here, this jumbo trapper. And they're large. I mean, get the job done and everything, but I wanted something smaller, easier to carry in a pocket, and they had just started coming out with pocket clips, which is like something that was, wow, why didn't they think of that back then? Maybe they did. I don't see any of them with pocket clips and stuff. But, so I kind of like left traditional pattern knives behind and went to more modern stuff and started getting into super steels and all this other stuff. And in the process, and then I'm talking decades, I completely forgot about traditional knives because I thought, I had no choice when I was growing up. You didn't have, could you have a flipper knife? That was considered a switchblade, so it wasn't available and it wasn't worth it if you had one, the risk involved and everything. And the other thing was, because I didn't have much of a choice, I went crazy when I had a choice with the more modern stuff. I had, I figure I had a lot of catching up to do. Because I kind of skipped flippers and everything for a longest time also. Like I said, they were considered illegal, and I never thought knife laws would change. I always thought they would always be biased against knives and stuff, and I never thought they would change, so I really didn't follow flippers until they started really about like a year and a half ago or so. I mean, I bought some M-Tech assisted opening knives when they first came out. The very first one that I had, I flipped it open a few times and literally the knife self-destructed. It fell apart. And I thought, well, that's interesting, but that's not useful in any way, shape, or form, But I had been missing out on the traditional pattern of knife. And one of our bias, I'm trying to get back on track here, is blade steel. Like if you get into modern knives and you say, D2. D2 is the only way to go, you know, because it's tool steel, it's hard, it takes an edge and everything. And yeah, D2 is a good steel if it's done right. That's where you start getting into Rockwell hardness, and you find out that, you know, some knives, not this one in particular, but some knives, they don't treat the steel hardness correctly, and D2 actually comes out softer than 440C, you know, or something like that. So it depends on how it's done, but I mean, if your bias is, I'm never going to go with AUS 8 or HCR 13 or 440A because they just don't hold an edge. If you're working out in the field and everything, and you don't have a knife sharpener and everything, and you don't know how to sharpen a knife, then 440A may not be the best thing for you, you know, but there's ways around that. And that's like traditional pattern knives had more than one blade available usually. So if you had, I don't have an example out here. Let me pause this. I needed a Stockman example. Yeah, so with softer steels, they're easier to sharpen, so you can usually sharpen them in the field. And if your main blade, when you're using all day to do your major cutting chores, whatever it is with a pocket knife, usually, you know, if you got a major cutting chore, you're going to carry a fixed blade with you. But if this one starts dulling out and won't cut paper, well, then you use your sheep's foot to cut paper, or the spade blade. You know, that one's kept sharp because it's not being used as much. This is better for, you know, like a downward cut. Stuff like that. Something you want to poke something with. That's how they got around stuff like that back in the day. They would have more than one blade. Usually, you know, like a couple of blades with it, so that you can cover more than one task, you know. You got like your skinning blade and stuff like that. Anything where you need like a curve, and then, oops, grabbed the wrong one. Then you got like a Warncliffe. So, the bias against steels is another one where people will just say, I'll never, it has to be a super steel. I'll never go with AUS 8 or whatever. Well, guess what? With D2 also. D2, you know, no matter what a super steel it is and everything, it's not stainless. I mean, it's semi-stainless. It's pretty close up there. But it misses it by 1 or 2%, you know, of getting to be in what is considered stainless. So, nice and shiny as it is, it's not as stainless as 440A. And 440A is found in traditional knives. Now, some people have a problem with sharpness. I have no problem getting a razor edge on these. I was just looking through forums and stuff and old videos, and some people had a problem of a few years back of getting an edge on one of those. All right, so what I'm saying is that some of your biases, some of your prejudgment, you know, prejudice means prejudging something. So if you say that I would never get a lady leg because it's just stupid, you know, and what would I ever use it for? Have you ever handled one? You know, I mean, a lot of this, you're just going on other people's opinions and stuff. If you've handled one and everything, then you find out that, yeah, all that goofy stuff is on the back. You know, it's still a knife in the front, and even though that looks goofy, it actually has a practical function somewhat, depending on the size of the lady leg knife, but it can be a cap lifter, you know. I mean, it is kind of like sexist, you know, but I mean, there's nothing wrong with the female form, you know, in a high heel. There's nothing wrong with that. Anyway, this is something I thought, you know, I wouldn't ever like. I'm not going to collect a bunch of them, but it's not as bad as I thought it was. Just like little knives, you know, you're thinking, oh man, why carry a knife? If you're going to have a knife, carry a big one. Don't carry a little one. Well, most of the time your cutting tasks are going to be small things. It's always good to have just a little knife, a small knife that you can either use on small tasks, or, you know, not frighten a sheeple. If that doesn't bother you or whatever, then that's fine. But sometimes you can get a bad rep in a company. You're out there, you whip out, even something as simple as this, because it flips out, they're like, oh, he's got a knife. Where if you've got to take two hands to open it and stuff, and it's this little small blade, then it really shows what a wimp they are, for being yeah, there's a certain amount of applying to the sheeple and everything. But it's also just like with brands, we'll have a bias against certain brands and we'll say, I'll never buy that. Now, sometimes that's justified. Like I used to buy a lot of Gerber knives when I was into, just having knives for use and stuff. And they worked well and stuff. But nowadays, I really am not into Gerber knives, I mean, same way with buck knives, they were really great when I first started using them, but even when going back to traditional patterns, I'm not into buck knives, I mean, they're all right and everything, and they're actually coming back as far as like trying to keep up with modern times. But anyway, like I said, because of my bias against knives, I missed out on a lot of these traditional patterns. Like, I didn't even know, I thought I knew all about traditional knives, but I really had only had like a copperhead when I was a kid and a melon tester, and I hadn't seen a lot of different types. And I missed out on a lot of different things like hawkbills, doctor's knives. I didn't even know these things existed until like a year and a half or so ago. Yeah, I mean, just and this, like here, this one is, like I said, a kind of a modern version of a doctor's knife. It's a 9CR13 or 9CR18 MOV. Anytime you see like an alphabet soup type of steel, a lot of times people just freak out and don't want it. But this thing has the advantage of being stainless and has a good edge holding capability. So I actually like this 9CR and 440C and stuff better than D2, because I mean, D2's all right if you're gonna be cutting a lot of stuff and you want it to keep it sharp and everything. If the steel is done right and everything, you do get a a little bit more edge hardness and stuff like that with it. And it is semi-stainless compared to like a carbon steel that's not stainless at all. The disadvantage, like that's another one. If you say, well, I only want stainless steel knives, I don't want to have to maintain my knife, then you're going to miss out on patina. You're going to miss out on, if that doesn't bother you. I mean, to some people it's patina, other people it's rust. I mean, but it's all in what it looks to you. But I mean, if you take like this knife for example, and you don't let the brass change, and you always keep it shiny, then it's not really your personal knife. Anybody could pick up one just like it and mistake it for theirs, But if you have a knife that patinas and changes, and it's got scars and stuff on it, then, that's yours. I mean, that's your knife. That's just not like a knife. That's your knife. It's got some of you in it, And if it's any knife like it's one of mine, it's probably got some of your blood on its own blade, Your DNA is actually in that knife. So all I'm saying is, don't let your bias prevent you from enjoying a whole nother aspect of knife collecting and knife enjoyment that you may be skipping out on. Like chasing the latest and greatest flipper and everything, it's going to cost you around $50 to $100 at least per knife. Finding an old pattern that you never experienced before might only cost you $10. I mean, there's a whole lot of, if you like things that are sharp and functional, and just the other thing about traditional knives is you can look at them and you can just enjoy them for just the handle material, or just the beauty, just the way it was put together. I mean, yeah, they're trying to do that with knives like this, This is what also I was thinking before. I always thought before, I hate a sheep's foot blade or a Warncliffe because there's like no point to it. I was really thinking more of a sheep's foot. Well, yeah, for self-defense, you might not want a sheep's foot, but not everything's self-defense with a knife, So I had a bias against blade shapes that I didn't really realize was exactly. I love Warncliffs. This is more of a Warncliffe shape. Most of the Warncliffs, a true Warncliffe would come down and the blade would be flat all the way across with no rise. These are kind of like modified Warncliffs. This one comes to more like a spear point, rather than a drop point. And this one here, this is the CJRB Agave. This one has a pretty cool sweep down to it and then an uprising. The advantage to that is you still have a lot of that flat cut ability, but you also have some curve cut ability. If you've got a true Warncliffe where it's just like a straight blade, oops, I keep grabbing the wrong one, then you're not going to have any curve ability. I mean, you're going to go up, you're going to be able to cut, let's say this is a slab of meat, you're going to be able to cut up here, but as you start curving, it's going to wind up more just towards the tip, and then it's just only going to be the very, like a needle edge. You're not going to be able to get anything, any depth with it. You're not going to be able to, anyway. All I'm saying is different blades have different purposes. I don't want this one to be too rambling along, so I'm just going to skip through a lot of this stuff about different brands. Like I'll never buy brand X. One of the ones is Spyderco's. I never thought I would like a Spyderco just because the hump looked ugly to me, Then I bought a Delica and I loved it. It's ergonomically, it's great, and the looks. It's kind of like, this is gonna piss off people, but it's kind of like if you married an ugly spouse. Let's put it that way. It could be male or female, and but they turn out to be very good at everything else. So appearances are, not everything. On something. If they're very good at being a knife, then it doesn't matter what they look like. Anyway. Another one is like handle materials. Some people say they hate G10, or they hate what is it? FRN, fiberglass reinforced nylon. That stuff is pretty sturdy, but it does have kind of a plasticky feel to it. G10 is still, a resin and everything else. It's still like that, but for some people they don't have a bias against it because it doesn't feel like a plastic. It feels more closer to a natural material. So with like micarta, this one's in micarta. If you've never experienced micarta, you might say, well, I don't like that. This is one of my favorite handle materials because it's a combination of, like canvas with resin to help hold it together, so it has natural and unnatural capabilities. The advantage to a synthetic type of finish and everything is that it usually, like wood, unless it's treated, and leather and stuff like that, will crack and age and stuff like that, separate bones, stuff like that. It used to have to be age. Celluloid, they would do the same thing. They would celluloid was a bad news type of thing for handle material because it would outgas and cause corrosion. But anyway, there's a bias against handle materials, and some of it is justified. If you've handled it or you've had experience with it, that's, some of these prejudices are not unreasonable. They're not a completely prejudiced. They're more just like, well, I tend to not like, but I'll make an exception. And that's all I'm trying to say is, think about the things that you just absolutely hate. Have you tried it lately? Like, if you say, well, I won't buy a knife under $50, no knife under $50. It's got to be $100 or up, or it's not worth my time. If you've got a lot of knives and you've experienced a lot of knives, that's fine. But if you're doing it just to be in the price crowd or whatever, or just to show off or whatever, you're missing the point. You're missing the point. A good $15 little camp knife like this will have an excellent little blade on it, but then it'll have functional blades too, like can openers and screwdrivers and awls and stuff like that, and a little bit of history with it too. Even though it's made in China. That was another thing I was going to cover, is country of origin. Some people say I will never buy a knife in China for whatever patriotic reason. And then they go post this on their iPhone X or whatever, costing $1,000. They're complaining about a $15 knife in China, supposedly because of the economics of it. And they're on over $1,000 phone. You know, so I mean, why are you railing against people that like knives just because it was made in China? You know, the same bias they had, this was weird. When I was growing up, a lot of people had the bias against Japanese knives and stuff because they thought they were cheap. Anything that was made in Japan was considered like what we think now is made in China. So there was a big bias against Japanese knives. And I had a saber knife that was made in Japan, and it was great. It was a great little pocket knife. I still got it, as a matter of fact. So don't let country of origin bias hold you back, you know, or think about if you're so super patriotic, do without anything Chinese, you know? You cannot do it nowadays. Now, maybe it's going to start changing because of the coronavirus and because of all that stuff, you know, all the people dying from it, and they're trying to blame China. It may or may not be true. I mean, I don't know. I'm not going to get into that too much. I'm just saying your bias against certain things are going to hold you back against experiencing things that you could have experienced. Now, if I would have been into traditional knives, there's a lot of Rough Rider patterns that when they came out 20, 25 years ago, I could have gotten easily, cheaply, and still have in my collection. By now, if I would have still been doing traditional knives, I would be able to show you several, probably more than several, GEC top-end traditional knives. But because I wasn't into them and everything, now I don't have any. You know, because I'm going to kind of like skip case, I think, because of the quality issues with case. This is another bias that I'm running into. My thought is I don't want to buy a case knife and spend $60, $70 on a case knife and have it fit and finish worse than a Rough Rider that's like $12. And it seems to be kind of like hit and miss with case. I don't know. So I'm going to skip that whole brand and just go to GEC, where you don't run into a whole lot of that with GEC because you're spending usually over $100 for a knife. So all I'm saying on this, I've rambled on really too long. I just wanted to say, don't let your bias hold you back against experiencing. You just don't know what you're experiencing. You don't know what you're missing. That's the term, you know. You don't know what you're missing if you're sitting there saying, I won't do this, you know, I will never buy one of these. Now, sometimes it's justified because something's happened to you. Let's say, for example, the first knife that you bought, let's say the first Rough Rider that you got, you open it up and a blade fell off, or it was so uneven, you know, you couldn't get it out, or you couldn't open it up. Well, if you got it from Smoky Mountain Knife Works, they're guaranteed for life, you know, so you could have just returned it, and you wouldn't have had a big issue. Anyway, all I'm saying is just don't let your bias and your prejudice hold you back from experiencing some, like, little knives. Oh, little knives, they won't cut anything. They'll cut you to the bone if you're not careful, you know. They're not practical. They're not useful. Yeah, this is one of the most useful little knives around. Thumb biter here, even though it's notorious now, but still, I know it'll cut. So thank you for watching. I'll try to be more specific on my videos like this, but this was just like a knife ramble thing. Like I said, it's something that's been going around in my head. I've got nobody else to talk to but you people who like knives. And yeah, like as a conclusion like this, some people don't like copper knives because they say it stinks or whatever. Fine, then you've experienced, you know, I can't smell it. I don't have a real good sense of smell anymore anyway. I'm getting old. I like it, even though it's a little bit heavier. It's twice the weight of the regular. This is the mini Archaeo with copper handles. I like this knife because it's changing. From being a shiny knife, it's starting to get a darker, rich color to it, and it's just like wow. Uh, Plus the shape, like I said, here's that Warncliffe again, basically, And all along I was thinking I don't like Warncliffes. Then I started looking up what a Warncliffe is. And it's like, you know what? I do like a Warncliffe. That's my preferred blade shape now. So anyway, thanks for watching and have a nice day.